And it's simply bowing and acknowledging the past for what it was is part of the work, because the tissues don't understand that we're not in the same trauma that was happening then.
Mm.
The genes have that. That's where epigenetics comes in, where we talk about this even with disease. It's one of my favorite things to actually tell patients when they tell me about their family history. I say, I want you to tell me, but I want to also say that we know genetically it's about 5 to 10% if you're actually going to inherit some type of issue from your parents, truly. Now we know it's behavior that is going to influence the expression of those genes. So that's the same with emotions, that if your life circumstance was all fine and dandy, then all of a sudden a trauma happened, it would wake up the gene of something, of heart disease, of Alzheimer's, of whatever. Folks, that's usually my biggest indicator when I hear somebody saying something like that. Like, I don't know why I have this. I don't know where that came from. It's like, bing, bing, bing. Oh, wait a second. Either it happened before you were, before you were verbal, so pre-verbal state, child state, which is where so many things are developed. Those first 2, 3, 4 years, 5 years are really big. Or it's way back in your line and it really has nothing directly to do with you, but yet there's something in you that is loyal to it, is in line with it. And what could that be? So yes, that's where the work comes in, is this beautiful movement of the soul, of what does the soul need and what needs to be seen with clarity and love and acceptance without judgment.
Hi, folks. Welcome back to Boom Vision. Today's interview is our returning guest, Dr. Ivonne Ferandell-Villarino. I'm uber excited to share today's interview because we dive into a modality that I want to bring more awareness to: Family Constellation Therapy. Do you ever feel you carry generational trauma and don't know how to heal from it? Do you find yourself stuck in the same pattern with either personal partners or business partners that never work out? How can family constellation work help you break emotional or generational trauma? You'll definitely want to tune in to hear what Dr. Yvonne has to share. Let's cue the intro. Welcome to the Boom Vision Podcast. I'm your host, Benjamin Ye. This show is about how you can thrive. It's when you build success in alignment with your mind, body, and soul. I created this podcast to give you perspectives and frameworks on how to strengthen your mindset and gain clarity in your purpose. It's time for you to live an extraordinary life with vision that you design. Let's get to work. Welcome to episode 34 of the Boom Vision Podcast. I'm super excited to share today's interview with our returning guest, Dr. Ivonne Ferandell-Villarino. As you may recall, I'm blessed to have met Dr. Ivonne last year in a constellation workshop that both my wife and I attended. In episode 16, we dove into the topic of the 3 T's: thoughts, trauma, and toxins. What she shared in that episode is that the 3 T's are things that your body is either going to absorb, it's going to match, or it's going to succumb. I've invited Dr. Yvonne back to our show because I wanted us to share the beauty and magic of family constellation work. As Stephen D. Farmer has said, when we heal ourselves, we heal the past, the present, and the future. So how can family constellation work help you in your journey to heal your emotional trauma, generational trauma, or even business trauma? As a brief background, Dr. Ivonne Ferandell-Villarino is a doctor of chiropractic who works at the Healing Arts Center of Altadena, California. She approaches each practice member as a true individual with their own masterful design. The goal is focused on facilitation and a true discovery towards empowerment for each individual who decides that they're ready to explore as a team. Her approach is a call upon the balance between mind, body, and spirit. She focuses on structure, biochemistry, nutrition, and emotions, and how they're all interconnected. Dr. Yvonne comes from a family line of healers and facilitators. Her parents are retired mental health workers from her hometown of El Monte in Southern California. And her sister, Vanessa, is an acupuncturist who works at the Healing Arts Center of Altadena alongside her and a team of other amazing holistic health practitioners. Together, they all have learned the value of community and how we are all truly in this wild world together. So, without further ado, here's Dr. Yvonne. Dr. Ivonne Ferandell-Villarino, welcome back to the Boom Vision podcast. It's our first returning guest. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me back. I love this. I'm excited. I can't wait to share our topic today.
Me too. Me too. I'd love to dive right in. And so, for our first time listeners, you shared your origin story back in episode 16, but I think it'd be great to just share a little brief description of what do you do now for our first time listeners?
Sure. So I am a doctor of chiropractic by licensure. That's my big umbrella and diploma on the wall. But I do holistic care. I'm a holistic health practitioner that likes to facilitate the connection between the mind and the body and the chemistry of the system. So I like to just create this innate ability within you, or actually it's not creating, I am facilitating the innate alchemy within you to be discovered, to be cherished, to be optimized in whatever way that's going to happen. So I like to do nutrition, I like to do structure, and I like to do emotional work. And part of the emotional work is constellation, which we'll talk about today. And then there's other facets, but I'm excited to talk about this part because I can say I use this literally every day in my practice, one-on-one with patients. So beautiful work.
Fantastic. So constellation work, constellation 101, like this is the main topic for today's interview, but love to hear from your perspective. What is it from a layman's perspective? Like, when you're describing to someone that's new to it, that doesn't know much about it.
So who comes to mind is my teacher, my first teacher, official teacher of constellation training, which is Francesca Mason-Bori. And she had a technique or an exercise. She said, what's your 30-second spiel? Like if you were in an elevator and somebody asked you what it was, what is it? And her response was conflict resolution. And I loved that because I thought, oh, well, I can get that. That makes sense. So conflict resolution, constellation work is a deep, beautiful work that really combines the spiritual nature that is innately within us, within our own innate power of our psychology. So it's developed by Bert Hellinger. He created this in the 90s. He was a missionary that went to the Zulu tribe in South Africa and stayed with the Zulu tribe for a little over 15 years. And what he noticed is that healing happens in groups, and it's magical and beautiful. We need each other there, and they have a deep respect for the ancestors in the tradition of where did we come from, who are we, and what else did we inherit from our family, not only our eyes or our hair or our skin tone, but we now know with epigenetics, we inherit the DNA of emotions that is 100% in our system. So it's not just body biological, it's our spiritual. So this is an approach to look at the links between who did we come from, what were the patterns, what were the issues, the successes, the challenges, the everything in between. I mean, for us to be in existence here, we had to come from so many people, and that is a momentous event. And we're meant to celebrate that and also to be resourced by that. We have in our family system, in our family story, the full experience of a human existence, whatever that is, the capacity of all emotions. And one of my favorite things from neuroscience, when I was learning a technique called havening, which I also love and we'll share about at some point, but havening, they talked about we're meant to have 50 to 60 different emotions within one day. That's normal. And how many of us can actually even name 50 emotions, like we think of like basics of like, well, there's happiness and there's joy and there's sadness. there's so much more. And why I mention that, it's because this body of work is more about talking about the feelings that are deep in our tissues and our soul. The brain is meant to be logical and this whole like, I got to figure it out. But really, we have this whole other side of us that is completely disregarded or ignored or not nurtured. And that's the feeling part. And where I see in my practice where most people have the biggest challenge is what to do with their feelings or how to feel them safely and appropriately so that they can allow it. This is the neuroscience brain, and we're going to talk. Your brain needs to have a part that will complete a circuit to feel an emotion when it comes up. It's not meant to be buried. When it's buried and unresolved or unmet, we all have needs, then the system will cause some disruption. So Constellation allows that circuit to complete within yourself and your family system so that you're healing. I think you mentioned in one of your podcasts, maybe it was one with me, where you're like healing happens like backwards and forwards.
When you
Something
heal
like
your
this.
past, you heal your
Yeah.
present and your future. I remember.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Bingo. I love that. Gives me chills again. So this is what that work does. So it's a different approach, and it is linked deeply in the roots of psychology. And it's used all over the world. The US is really getting more popular with its uses, which is great. But yeah, so that's the basic. If hopefully that helps a bit of what it is.
It does. Well, it definitely covers the surface area, and then we go deeper into that, right?
For sure. For
And
sure.
so with constellation work, is it science? Is it woo? Is it a mix of both? Like when you think about the core essence of it, where in the spectrum is that in terms of science and woo from your perspective?
You know, there's so much. So I did I've done little research on it to see what's on like PubMed or research articles to see the efficacy of this, because I like to have that backing just to see who's done the work. So they see that this is a significant intervention for family and emotional healing. So why exactly it works is probably still up for debate. But what is noticed is that there is a significant change within an individual when they go through this process.
Hmm.
So it's like anything else. It's like therapy. You're working with this deep cognitive part of your body and brain and connecting those signals together. So from the outside, if no one's seen it and they might witness a group session, it might freak you out. It might interest you. It might resonate with you and have you feeling all sorts of different things because we're deeply connected. So the science, it's always so funny. Science is so limiting. But what I like in the nature of science, it's meant to be experimental. We're meant to experiment with these things safely and see what is the result. You know, the curiosity is the first thing that needs to happen of like, well, why do I do this? Why do I have that pattern? Why do I have that thought over and over again? So yeah, science is always goofy to me. I'm a skeptic, and I like when science backs up what I already know intuitively. And I
Hmm.
feel like I tell my patients this often, like my job is to prove to you with science why everything you were already thinking and experiencing is true and real. And I'm just validating that experience for you. So that's still limited on one level because there's still so much we need to know. But what we do know, again, is fascinating. And so it backs up. This changes a lot for the individual, or can. That's why there's lots of modalities in the world. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned the word therapy. And so I love to understand, what would you say would be the main distinction between having a therapy session, for example, versus a constellation session?
Well, that is such a big question. And I would dare to say that they're like, it's the same on one level. It really is. But I like to say people can profoundly have a movement of change and awareness accelerated when it's in groups. Again, that thing of we are meant to heal in groups. We're not meant to do this alone. We have to do the work individually alone. We have to make that choice. But true healing comes from being witnessed among your peers and being held in that space. So therapy. So I have a background in mental health. My parents were both mental health care providers,
Mm.
and I was exposed to various therapies. So I love therapy. But what I like the most, the types of therapy that I like the most are the ones that are embodying. So somatic therapy, Gestalt therapy, Reiki and bioenergetics, holotropic breathing. These are things that move the body. I'm very unimpressed by talk therapy, because if you just use words, you can talk yourself out of anything or into anything. It's not affecting change, because again, we are having this need that needs to come up as we are more than our thinking brain. We have an animal body, and there are parts of us that are nonverbal, and that needs to be addressed. And the conditioning that happens with our reasoning and our logic, that can get us in trouble. So yeah, therapy and Gestalt, very different, or therapy and constellation, very different, yet the same, depending on how you use it. Because if within therapy, there are so many modalities. And just like constellation, there's so many versions of that too. But they are both doing the same thing, which is touching deep into your psychic and your spiritual and your psychology.
Yeah.
And then how that transforms into your physiology. Because we know now that our brain, stress is like the leading cause to dis-ease in the system. So how do we manage our stress? Stress is always going to be there, but how do we manage it?
Yeah. And I want to add something to that too, Dr. Yvonne, is because I think there is definitely, when I think of the difference between therapy and constellation work from a layman's perspective, because I'm not a doctor, but I know what you mean when it's similar, because it's almost like, what's the difference between a personality test versus like a human design or like, Enneagram, like, right? There's a lot of different types of modalities or things that accomplishes a similar thing in terms of giving you more awareness, but just in a different way, different lens, different angle, right? But there's a quote I remember that I felt just really relevant to what you just shared, which is, this is by Dr. Bruce Lipton, which is that the moment you change your perception is the moment you rewrite the chemistry of your body.
Bingo, full body chill. Absolutely.
And when I was listening to you, it just reminds me of that quote, because at the core of it, whether your perception is changed in a therapy session, whether it's changed through this constellation work, either way, if it accomplishes that goal, then it is similar of one and the same. But it just, everyone receives information differently. Everyone, their curiosity is piqued in a very different way. And how do we unlock that for people that just resonates with them in terms of who they are and really their soul?
Absolutely. And that's the beauty of the healing arts, is there are so many ways. Like, I don't know if I shared this before on the first one, but the buffet of like health and wellness, I probably did. Yeah. It's like that. It's like everything is just here and available. And the mechanism is constellation, NET work, neuroemotional technique. It's another one I love to do. Chiropractic, acupuncture, massage, whatever. It doesn't matter. So if the piquing of the interest is truly a good thing, but that will innately come to whatever that individual's personality is, in a sense, right? Like there's no forcing of anything. And I think one of my favorite things I love about my teacher Francesca is she says there's so much room for no, and there's so much room for yes, and then there's a maybe too. And it's just this sense of what feels safe for you to explore. And there's definitely trust comes into it a lot. When you're working with people and the ones that are curious about this work, I suggest anybody who is curious, there's a couple resources we're going to mention in this podcast, I bet. But it's always worth exploring something when you see there's a movement happening and you see that there's a great number of people. What I like about this work, just to even plant the seed more of how this works, then South America, they use this technique in the legal system for courts. So court systems just
Really?
Yes, they do. So what they do is, what they notice is 85%, and I'm going to fudge the numbers a little bit, but it's pretty high. 85% of those conflicts between like small claims court resolved before they even had to go to court with this technique. So it's like, so true conflict resolution, even in the legal system, what? And it's that profound because it's just a technique to deal with conflict. That's it. So that, how woo-woo is that? You're not doing anything goofy. So it'll be interesting to see what people are curious about, and I'm always curious about what you're going to ask me, because of course you are a curious one and you like to explore all the different facets. So I love hearing where your brain goes and
Yeah.
exploring. So
Yeah. Well, so that leads to my next question then, Dr. Yvonne, because I know from my own experience, I've had the benefit of two types of constellation work. And what I mean by two types is that the first time was in a group workshop with Francesca and you as well. And that's with, and when you're in such a loving space where that trust is intact, not just by the facilitators, but just all the participants, it brings that comfort and just that safeness around to be able to dig in deeper in terms of what quote unquote conflict you want to resolve. However, the second type I understand is also working with inanimate objects, whether it's crystals, whether it's stones. I mean, and it's really fascinating because my preconceived notion before was that, oh, I think having it live in person would be more effective. But that's not necessarily true. And so I'd love to get your perspective, between the two types of constellation work, whether it's live participants in a group or it's using inanimate objects. How does that work for those that really are just don't know much about that?
yeah, so let's see how I can explain this, because it is different. So in a group setting, that's really the ideal, because that's, again, where it was developed, where it was formed. But what we know is that why the group works is because each participant is part of the greater field of humanity, of life, of everything. And that means that in the day to day, with even inanimate objects, that has a resonance and a presence in the live world. So, explaining the technique, I should probably do first, so that even makes some sense to somebody who's never heard this before. So, I'll give an example. There might be somebody that has a conflict or an issue, and they want to look at it. So, what they do in a group setting is they will have their facilitator listen to what the conflict is. There's various ways on how to receive that information, and there's various ways on how the group receives that information. Sometimes the group knows what the conflict is, and sometimes the group does not know what a conflict is. That one that doesn't know is called a blind, and it doesn't matter which one, because it all resonates through. So once that conflict is identified, the facilitator will set up representatives to resonate. Anybody can resonate. A resonator is you are coming and stepping into this field that has been created to find clarity for this issue. So this is where people might feel like, what is happening when a person is resonating? And there's been some misconceptions about what happens. Like, are people being possessed? Are they channeling? Are they doing all, there's a lot of different things that people might interpret that as. What is happening is the representative is standing into the energetic field that is available, and it is giving information through their body, their mind, and the environment. And the science behind that, I don't know a really great way to explain that. I just know I've experienced it for over 20 years, and I've seen within my own work and with other people's work that people will resonate and they will be the spitting image of someone's grandfather. In the case of like my mother, like, that's my mother. That person doesn't know my mother. They don't know anything about her. And she just stood as she did, and she just spoke as she did, and has the same energetic movements as she does. So this is where that woo-woo part could come in of what is happening. But all that's happening is just a reflection of what is that energetic and what is that feeling sense of the spirituality of your soul family. So people resonate. You watch, and there's patterns. And as a facilitator, you watch to see what is being shown, and different things will happen. Like if there was an example of war in the family and it wasn't really known or addressed, people will fall to the floor as soon as they are in the resonator. They feel like they need to fall. Now, do they fall literally? No, we train the people to say, feel with about 20% of your being, protect your body, but still notice and trust the feelings that come in, because you're working with that family's field. You're honoring that family's field, and nothing is meant to move fast. It's meant to just be felt. So this is the beginning of what that looks like when it's people. So the same is true when you need to work alone, which I do a lot one-on-one with patients. I have little objects in the room and I ask them, bring in an object, because there's something that happens to the soul when you put it outside of yourself. If you put the thought or the feeling exteriorly, and then you get to witness, how does it feel to be in that position? So that object could be a shell, or could be a piece of paper. It doesn't really matter, but these objects all do hold a position of information. And we stand in that field to get that information that is more feeling rather than thinking. This is complicated. I think it can be complicated, but yet at the same time, it's pretty simple in the sense of we don't want to overthink things. It's again really focusing on what are you feeling, and then what are the dynamics that start to unfold? What are the patterns? What are the feelings or sensations? So that's a beginning part, but I'm well aware that this is a very complicated subject. And so hopefully it can be, maybe it's not for some people. Maybe I'm doing an okay job at explaining it, but there's a lot of different parts, but basically there's a difference in the sense of being a community or being with yourself. It doesn't matter, because no matter where you are, you always have everything that you ever came from within you that can become and expressed outside of you. So depending on which technique we use to start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would add this to what you just shared, Dr. Yvonne, is that depending on what conflict you want to resolve, or even things you don't know, that just seems like there's some mental invisible block that you just want to address, right? Ideally, if there's an opportunity to be part of a live participation in a group, that was my first experience, and I went with my wife Ruby to that workshop, and I was so glad that I did, because I got to see firsthand that experience. And I can say that it was amazing. But at the same time, if there's things that are just private and you might have reservations of sharing it in a group setting, then maybe the private one-on-one session where you're working with inanimate objects might be a good, call it, appetizer into this world for people that might want something a little bit easier to digest, but also want that privacy, right? It just depends on the person, right? Because you have to have that open-mindedness, that curiosity, and that love of I'm here to learn. And when you come into the space with that intention and a mindset, then I notice things just start opening up.
Absolutely. That's the biggest thing, is the courage to look at these big things inside and outside. And I will say, since I know how the work works, even with folks that don't want to have all their business out for a group, and especially if they don't know them, that's where blind constellations come into the field. So blind is only you and the facilitator know, and you write on a piece of paper what you want each person to represent. So then there's like no chance that anyone else is bringing in anything of their own, or not as much of a chance of their own stuff coming in. Typically, as a facilitator, you can kind of tell which people are making it a drama and which aren't, because there's very clear principles of what's going on once you go through the schooling of it. But I say that just to mention that it's a place of honor. When the facilitators, all of us are trained, there's so many different trainers in the world, we all train to completely honor and respect and never shame your family or your family system, and really check in constantly with the one that we call the seeker, the one that's really looking for the work. So yes, definitely privately is very helpful and lovely, and you can do that, but you can also do it in a group setting and just tell your facilitator, hey, this is a really sensitive subject. I'm not interested in like sharing that out loud. How can we do it in a different way? And they'll have a way to do that. That is still a beautiful movement and will still give you lots of wonderful healing and information.
Yeah. I'm really glad you brought that up, because I totally forgot about the blind way of being able to self-facilitate, but then people representing, they don't know, but this, whatever they feel and whatever they're able to just feel in the moment of that energy, they're able to express, and you're still get that information when needs to take place. So a little bit of a tangent here, but I remember, in preparation of our interview today, you mentioned about watching this show. It's a Netflix show called Another Self. Yeah. I love to bring that up because, for folks that are listening to it right now that are interested in constellation work, you're just watching even though this is a drama TV show, but the core underlying essence and tone of it is actually centered around constellation work. So I'd love to hear, how did you hear about the show? What are your thoughts about it?
Oh my God, I was so excited to hear about this show and more excited to actually watch it and completely binge watch it. I couldn't help it and see that they did such a good job of explaining it. So I learned about it because of Francesca, my lovely teacher, through like an online group platform. She's like, ladies and gentlemen, everybody, look at this. We have come such a long way because it's new. And it was dubbed from Turkish into English. It was cheesy and full of drama following these three women, but they stayed true to the technique and they were able to really place characters that were the classic individual's experience of the work, the skeptic, the believer, the one that's dealing with a health issue, the one that would never believe but wanted to try, the one that got angry at the situation and thought this is crap, I'm doing something else. It was were beautiful, and I hope they make another season. So that was really great to see. It's never been something so public, and the first time that this did come public, I want to say for any listeners too, to have more of a live version of this. You can go all over YouTube for all sorts of Bert Hellinger live action examples and all sorts of other facilitators. And then also on Netflix, again, thank you, Miss Gwyneth Paltrow for Goop. She did a series for Sex, Love, and Relationships, episode 5, in her second season, has a whole episode on constellation as a way to help couples deal with conflict. And so they facilitated 2 sessions for this one couple. And Kato, who I've sat in circle with before, she's excellent. And why I like her is she admits it in the show too. She's like, I'm the biggest skeptic in the world. She's like, I'm not going to believe that it's real unless I do it myself and I do it the way I need to. And she's very, very big on blind constellations. She doesn't want anyone to be influencing anything outside of whatever, because sometimes if you hear the story, that might wake up something in yourself. And they do say, no matter who's actually working, everyone in the circle is working that's there, no matter what. There's no way, Francesca used to say this too. She's like, there's no way that I could promise you that you're not working when you're here. There's no way to just observe this work. You are a part of it if you're here, and your family system showed up. And anything that you might feel that you see that you're not directly part of, if it evokes something within you, that's an indicator that your family has something similar and wants to heal as well. So it's a beautiful, another interconnection between, wow, we are truly connected to everyone. And yes, we might have different flavors of how we got to our stuff, different journeys, like choose your own adventure, but we're all human. So we're
Yeah.
all in it together. Yeah, these shows are great. I was so pleased to see.
Yeah. Well, and to let my audience know too, after Dr. Yvonne recommended to me, I pretty much binge watched the show on the prior weekend. And I'm glad I did, because it's like, yeah, it's things that I experienced, in our live workshop last year and also in our sessions. It's like, yeah, it's a good way to really in a introductory way of having people understand what is this about, what it can do for you, because the results and your experience can be vastly different for everyone. And it just depends on what stage of a life you're in, how open you are, and what is it that you're looking to resolve that you know and don't know. That you
Yes.
know and don't know, right? I mean, it's, and so I think as a lead to the next question here is, if you can share some experiences from either experience without naming names, but whether it's clients, whether it's just in a workshop, if you can share some experiences you've gone through, I think this will give people more context of, wow, how can this apply in my life? You know what I mean? So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. So I'll pull from the last workshop we had, which was just a few weeks ago, thankfully. And this one woman was really interested in seeing the family dynamic of just her family of origin, which is your mother, your father, and then any siblings. And they explain that there are no boundaries, that people are really enmeshed and it's convoluted and complex. So there's something, one of the basic principles of constellation is the orders of love or the orders of life. What did life say was true? So first they allowed the resonators to just be in the field. They were placed wherever the seeker thought best for them, for mother, father, siblings. And there are interesting things to observe just from that. And we checked in with each of those participants, and you could see that there was exactly what they described. And so the simple movement of placing the family in its correct order is this: you place the father to the right, the mother to the left of them, and then the children in order of birth, lined up next to each other, not in front of each other, not surrounding each other, not in a circle, but lined up. And then checking in, how does that feel? And the seeker witnessing this, they just had, you could see this aha moment of, oh my God, I thought that we were all just supposed to be just anywhere we wanted to be. But really, I can see that when we're set up in the right order of things, which there's some controversy about, mother and father, patriarchy, gender roles, all this. And I'm well aware of those limitations of the new world that we're living in, of what those identities mean. But in this work, we start here. This is where it started. But so just the order, and to see how did that feel for the system. It felt really settling and lovely. And something that can happen in a dynamic of a family when there is a meshment is if one of the parents is unavailable to the partner, because it must start with a good partnership and they are the ones that are in charge of the adults. But sometimes when one is not emotionally available, one of the children will step in as the provider. Like a son will step in as the father or the husband to the mother. And then the father just keeps going off into the distance of unavailability. And what does that mean for that son, for example? That means the son doesn't get to be a kid anymore. That means they took on more responsibilities that were meant for him. Sometimes there's a lot of Jungian psychology within this work too. So there's something called the devouring mother. And that aspect of this devouring mother is seeking to get her need met in the wrong place. And what pressure does that put on that child? And then how does that dictate through the rest of that person's life? They're always looking for someone that they must be officially mothered by because they never got it in the first place. And then there might be in this other position of, well, I don't know how to be a man, or I didn't even have the adolescence to be a kid, so I skip steps. And then there's this unmet need of just being a kid. So this is the beauty of just the simple movements of what were you supposed to be and how does that look? So that's the first example that comes in, just to say how it works to be placed and how it works to allow what life really showed. What is true? Were you really the father? No, you were the second born or whatever. And so that's what comes to mind first. And I don't know, there's so many experiences, but I'll start there and see what you think about that.
Yeah, it's interesting because like the experience you just shared, it helps bring context to dynamics that you might be feeling with your immediate family that perhaps are alive, right? And what's really fascinating about this constellation work is that it goes on even really past lives, and not even your own life, but also in your family. And that TV show, Another Self, they say it beautifully in that it's like everyone's life has a flight recorder.
Yeah.
And, when you think about a flight recorder in an airplane, if it ever has an accident or whatever it may be, it's always recording, the conversations or what's happening, so you can understand and get a glimpse of what's really happening in those moments. And what's interesting, if you think about our ancestors or our great great grandparents or great great uncle or whoever it may be in our family genes, right, so to speak, it's the analogy I use a lot in my show is that if our body is a vehicle and our mind is a driver, well, our belief and our limiting beliefs is the baggage we carry in our trunk. And regardless of whether you want to grow your business and you want a faster car, it's like, well, you can upgrade from a Camry to a Ferrari, but guess what? 10,000 pound baggage that you have in the trunk, that gets carried over to your new car. By
Yeah.
learning to identify and letting those baggage go alone is going to make you go faster. It's not always about the car. Now, I say that a lot, but the new spin I want to add to that in the context of constellation work is that, there's this really thin, invisible line that's being towed in back of your vehicle too. And the end of that line is, guess what? It's a U-Haul with a crap load of flight recorders.
Totally love this image. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And but the thing is that when you first think about that image, initial response might be, oh God, that just feels heavy. It's not meant to, because those flight recorders has everything wrapped into it. It's all the love, it's the blessing,
Mm,
it's the resources. Yes, it might also have emotions or trauma that's also all bundled in, but it's not just all negativity. And what I want to dive into with you, Dr. Yvonne, is that when it comes to not just your own living relatives' trauma, but past trauma,
yes.
how does that work in constellation? How does it come about? Because, like, one of the questions, if I'm putting myself in my audience's shoes, it's like, well, okay, well, if my great great grandfather might have a trauma that they've gone through, and in terms of their experiences prior to giving birth or after, like, how does that work?
Yeah. So great. This is exciting. This is a part that's fascinating. And I love your analogy of these little strings and U-Hauls behind. So I'll use this example of what we kind of already set up, which is like mother, father, and like unavailable parent, right? So what we would look at is, why did one of the parents choose an unavailable partner? So why it ties into that is, what example did they have in their own family? So you first branch out. How were their parents? You always just start with who is directly back, and you see what's that relationship like. What stories do you know? What history do you know about them? Family history is a really big part of who immigrated from where, what type of culture did they come from, wars, everything. What were the expectations placed systemically onto that family system? Because we all come from some type of construct. So that's where you start is, okay, well, that behavior was learned, that you chose a partner that was unavailable. So who did you learn it from? And then you just keep going back generation to generation. You can pinpoint it. Bingo. Okay. Oh, it was great grandma. She was the one that had some type of, and in the case of trauma, this is something that carries through because it was too painful to do anything else other than be unavailable. And usually that stems from a major war, death, loss. So for example, a great grandmother maybe went through the Depression and gave birth to tons of kids. Father went to war. Well, I'm going to mix up history, but father went away, passed away, or mother died in childbirth. So that if a mother died during childbirth, the father had 10 kids that they had to take care of. In his mind, he's thinking, oh my God, what am I going to do to take care of all these kids? What am I going to do with the emotions that come up with that? I need to, out of survival, be off of line because it's too grand of a thing to bear. So I'll go push and shove that emotion down, and I'm going to go find somebody else who can take care of the kids, or it's going to be the oldest kid in the family, which that creates all sorts of other ripple effects of trauma and issue. So it starts with something woke up the genes. That's where the trauma comes in, and it helps to know what the trauma was, because then it will allow your system, present moment, present time, to know that something big happened and it woke up this need and this ability to, I have to shut it down or I can do this instead, whatever the limitations or the resources were depending on that time in life. So connecting through, and then how does that translate into moving forward? So it's amazing because we come from all of it, and it just depended on what resources were there and available at the time to deal with that issue. And then what resources do we have now? And it's simply bowing and acknowledging the past for what it was is part of the work, because the tissues don't understand that we're not in the same trauma that was happening then.
Mm.
The genes have that's where epigenetics comes in, where we talk about this even with disease. It's one of my favorite things to actually tell patients when they tell me about their family history. I say, I want you to tell me, but I want to also say that we know genetically it's about 5 to 10% if you're actually going to inherit some type of issue from your parents, truly. Now we know it's behavior that is going to influence the expression of those genes. So that's the same with emotions, that if your life circumstance was all fine and dandy, then all of a sudden a trauma happened, it would wake up the gene of something, of heart disease, of Alzheimer's, of whatever. There's a whole other theory too about there are really no diseases. It's
Mm.
really just a sense of what need was not met and how is that expressing. That's a whole other topic. But
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So
got it.
so more on family stuff. Hopefully I answered that question okay. Because we're a culmination of all of it.
No, it did, and I'll rephrase it, I guess, in terms of my takeaway of what you just shared, Dr. Yvonne, is that throughout our, call it, family heritage, people have experienced different things in their era, in their lifetime. And the emotions that were not resolved in those lifetimes, again, it becomes a little part of that flight recorder, of that memory stick.
Yeah.
And that collection of memory sticks, right, or flight recorders that gets passed down, knowing or not knowingly, when those things happen, there are certain events that you might experience in your lifetime, present time, that might activate certain things. And arguably, it's probably me subconscious because you don't even know.
Oh yeah.
And sometimes there's this feelings of like, why do I have this fear? Why do I have this anxiety? Or why do I have this reaction to something where where does that come from? And you may have this inner knowing of, it doesn't feel like it's me, but I'm feeling it. So what is this? Right. And that's where something like constellation can really help, is to explore, what is that? Is it yours? Is it not yours? And can you leave it behind? Because you don't have to carry it on. And the power of this work that I really appreciate, and that's why I want to bring more awareness to it, is that when I mentioned before in a previous episode that when you heal the past, you heal the present and future. I mean, that's literally the core of this, because if you don't heal it now, it's not a guarantee, but there is a pretty good chance that your future generations will also feel it too. So if you have the awareness and a means and a curiosity and a love to resolve it now, like, why not do it?
Yes. And I love that you said love. This is really important to the work because a big misconception that happens is sometimes out of loyalty or out of feelings of obligation, we will take on the unlived lives of our family members. If there was a story that you heard about, grandma so and so wasn't able to do so and so, and then you find yourself not being able to do that thing as well, like was never successful in business, for example. Well, they didn't have the success, so how dare I do something different? I should stay loyal to them. And that comes down to this big part of out of love is where all of this comes from. And when we understand that it is all from love, then we can soften to know that no one was trying to hurt anybody. Yes, Jack the Ripper was someone's family member. We do want to say there are some bad people in the world and in our family systems. But for the wholeness of the system, of the whole family story, there are deep, immense amounts of love and truth within our the soul of the family, and we want to honor that as best we can. And how we do that is by acknowledging and saying, okay, well, this happened, this was true. This is one of Bert Hellinger's sweet little favorite books of his, is called Acknowledging What Is. And it is a simple fact of acknowledging the truth of what things were lived through, and then also honoring that, oh, okay, that is what was that parent or system's issue. That does not mean it has to be mine. I have free will over here in a big sense, in a big way. I have different choices, I have different resources, and I want to use those resources to fulfill my true destiny or fate. And it's really a big bow to that was the fate of the family. And out of love, I want to do it maybe differently, or out of honor, I want to do it differently, but not the same. And that's where the patterns and the things, like you mentioned, that folks, that's usually my biggest indicator when I hear somebody saying something like that. Like, I don't know why I have this. I don't know where that came from. It's like, bing, bing, bing. Oh, wait a second. Either it happened before you were, before you were verbal, so pre-verbal state, child state, which is where so many things are developed. Those first 2, 3, 4 years, 5 years are really big. Or it's way back in your line and it really has nothing directly to do with you, but yet there's something in you that is loyal to it, is in line with it. And what could that be? So yes, that's where the work comes in, is this beautiful movement of the soul, of what does the soul need and what needs to be seen with clarity and love and acceptance without judgment. Now, I've
Yeah.
seen a lot of, it was so sweet, even in the last session, this one woman was so, you could see the amount of shame that she held because of her great grandfather's line. He went and married 1 million people. And there were tons of children that were from those marriages. And he did the right thing and took care of those kids. But he had his wife, and then he had like 6 other women with the kids. And you could see the woman exploring this. She was so shamed by it. But once everyone was lined up and had their place, she started to settle and she started to not have the judgment. And she got to really see, okay, this is what it was. Okay. Like, it's just, there's this letting go of just acknowledging, yeah, that's what happened. And it doesn't mean you have to do that. It doesn't mean you're going to invite that in. And her conflict was about her husband, because she saw her women in the family line choose this person that did that. So her fear is to not be available. Now it's all unconscious, it's subconscious. Her thought is, I can't fully trust somebody because this is what happened in the family line. Look what happened to her. She was so bitter and angry by this. And that's my fate too, if I open up myself to love. No, doesn't have to be. She actually did choose a good man that wasn't going to do that to her, but it didn't matter. She still had to heal this part because she was loyal to that grandmother. And she thought, well, she never got to have a good life. Why am I going to have one? So it's, these things blow my mind because it's a simple reflection of, okay, wait a second. And you kind of mentioned this already, like that perspective line, the quote from Bruce Lipton.
Yeah. The moment you change your perception is the moment you rewrite the chemistry of your body.
That feeling is like, just look at it differently and let's get a new angle here. And then there's a lot of other cool stuff that'll happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned about business, and I'd love to, whether it's business or it's career,
Yeah.
what are things that you've seen shown up that people can also relate to? Because there's definitely the personal family element of things, but also, just from a balance of mind, body, and soul when it comes to your career, your business, like is there an example that comes up that you can share?
Yeah. So business is so interesting. I love business constellations, and I'll lay down the first principle of it. Businesses are an open system. That means that everyone must have a task in order to be in that system. Otherwise, you are not there. It is not family. Family is closed. You cannot change your family system. You are that.
Mm,
So there's this huge thing that comes up in business where you hear the dynamic being told of, oh, we're like a family here. And it's like, to what regard? Because what you see in a lot of companies, families, like family comes into it then, because you're keeping somebody in there that isn't providing the right task for business. And that causes major complication. So there's the simple parts of this feeling of business is very unique. It is not emotional as much as a family. So business, I've seen so many beautiful ones done. An example that comes to mind is this one woman wanted to build like a garden with this school. It was like her project that she wanted to do at the school. And the head ups and the facilitator, or the like faculty members, there was so much conflict between she and them and the garden and all this. And there was something tied to that garden that had nothing to do with what the institutions were doing. They're like, yeah, we're well aware that you want to do this thing, but it actually just doesn't work for this pace and space for this. There's some other emotional attachment to it that had nothing to do with what the actual institution had to do and provide because it was business. So seeing that lift a veil for her, because we set it up, this is what was revealed, but you can set it up like that in the sense of, okay, there's a conflict at work, there's a governing board, and then there's an employee. There is always with employees a big sense of who came first, who's the number one, the VP, and then who came first, because there's even a hierarchy in team members and the respect that needs to come with that. And simply when that isn't there, there's a disorder. And so it's just, again, very interesting that these things are very clear when you see them, but no one ever talks about them. So then it can be confusing. So that's one example of just conflict within like institution. And this, if it's more of like a personal business thing, because there's lots of, obviously you like to work with entrepreneurs and growth and all this. So when it comes to somebody in business, that turns into usually a more of either a systemic constellation, which is more about society. Like, what is the environment? What did you get raised in? What is the pulse of what is available in that world? And does that fit with your vision? Or is there actually an internal issue? Then that would usually be familial in your system. You have to look at what is the stopping point. And that goes back to if so-and-so could never have a successful business. And for some reason you resonate with great-great-great-grandfather, great-great-grandma, you always think of that story. There's something there that you're loyal to that you're not allowing to come forward. Something is unseen, unknown of, or you might not even have consciousness awareness. And this is where diagnostics come in with constellations to see where does the energy want to go. And a diagnostic is really checking in and seeing where's the issue. Is the issue in this part of me that I'm really completely unknown? Is my vision not exactly right for what I'm going to be bringing to the world or in the right environment? Or is it something else? So it's just seeing which one needs to be addressed. And that's the beauty of constellation. It'll make it very clear. And your body, and again, your field, your energetic field never wants to take you anywhere that you can't handle. And even with that knowledge, there's always room for no. Like, that makes me feel uncomfortable to even think about that. So I can stop at this time. It's never pushing. It's a really gentle, sweet, slow process.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you for sharing that. So, Dr. Ivonne, in terms of golden nuggets, right? Like, if there's one thing about constellation work that you just wish people knew or understood about, what would be that one golden nugget that you'd be able to share about this work?
Well, what comes to mind is be willing to be completely surprised by what is true. And I say it in that sense because our logical brain is always trying to fix and do and create a solution. And with this work, the beauty of it is be willing to be surprised, be willing to be awed, be willing to lose expectation, and really uncover what did life say is what comes to mind with like a big L. What is life? So that's what comes to mind first, because and then also be willing to know that transformation is deeply possible. Because sometimes I mentioned in the first podcast that some of us can be really addicted to our stories, and they get so stuck in that and the racket of that. And so be willing to consider what it would be like, what it would feel like to not resonate with that story anymore. Or what if there's a new story, a more ideal one, or a more ideal feeling? Be willing to have something different and courageous enough to explore that and really create this place of you're worth it. You're worthy to look at these different things and really live your best life.
Lovely. And so in terms of action steps, Dr. Ivonne, what would be one action steps that you can recommend or share that if the audience is interested about constellation work, they want to learn more, or something's pulling them to take action, what would be one thing you can recommend?
For sure. Number one is any living ancestor that you have, you go sit down and talk with them and ask them everything, especially the old ones. Ask them about their lives, about their greatest challenges, the stories that they heard growing up, ask to see the family photo so you get a visual of it. I'm amazed at how many people do not talk within their family. And sometimes it's just not possible because people have passed on, but then see if you can find friends and like of relatives, in that sense, or look up some ancestral history of just the origin of your people. And we're all mutts. We all come from all different places and stages. And so there's information out there. So my biggest action step would be talk to your parents while they're still alive if you have them. Talk to your siblings, especially if they're older and far away and you're willing to talk with them. Sometimes we really do need to separate ourselves from family members that are toxic. I totally understand that. Never make anything, unsafe for yourself. But look into those stories and then ask yourself the questions that we've already kind of mentioned of, well, why do I do that thing? Why do I do this thing? Why am I still stuck on this thing that I really have no idea why I do it, but this feels like a limitation. This feels like I keep repeating and falling into the same hole. Like I love that little story where, they say I'm walking down the street and all of a sudden I'm in the dark. And it's like, what am I in? Oh, I'm in a hole. Okay, I'm going to crawl out of the hole. Then you walk down the street again. You fall into another, you're in darkness again. I'm in the hole. I'm in the hole. Crawl out of it again. This time you walk down, you can see the hole and you fall in anyways. And then you walk down the street again and you're, I'm not going to fall in this time. You fall in anyways. And so it's this thing of, if you've noticed, this is kind of how life is. Eventually you do walk around the hole, but there has to be a conscious awareness of, am I in the dark about this or not? How did I get why am I in the dark about this? What information can I gather and who can help me get that information? Because Jungian psychology says this too, you can't see your own back. You can't see your own shadow of that. So we're meant to do this healing together. So those are the action steps. Sit down with yourself. What are your things? And then talk to your family and get as much information as you can, because that will help and open up. And even just the searching, I've seen so many patients do this, and the amount of healing that comes from just speaking with those family members, long lost ones, is insane. And then taking that to the constellation room, oh my God, it's just unbelievable.
Mm,
Yeah.
beautiful, beautiful. And episode 16, Dr. Yvonne, you recommended a book which was called It Didn't Start With You by Marka Wolin, right?
Yes.
What would be another book that you can recommend, maybe perhaps as it relates to constellation work or within this realm, you recommend our audience to read?
Yeah. Well, that book is definitely like the main stake one. The other one I mentioned already, Bert Hellinger, Acknowledging What is a really nice one. And then there's another one called The Body Keeps the Score, which is, I'm trying to look at the name because I'm really bad with names. I read way too much. But let's see what it is. Well, The Body Keeps Score is a good one. And why I like to mention that is because, again, like you mentioned that little image of the flight recorder, your body is listening to you constantly. So not only is it listening to present moment, present time life, it's also listen to every other person, ancestor that's come before you. Your bones and your blood have all that history.
Yeah.
So I like to just bring and shine a light onto that.
Yeah.
Yeah, other ones
Got it.
I can't think of any other ones for the moment for constellation specific, but I do recommend the basic one, that one of It Didn't Start With You. That just does such a beautiful job of explaining this work.
Hmm.
Family inherited trauma. Big one. We all have it. No one didn't have a mother or a father. We all came from a woman and a man in some way, shape, or form. That egg and that semen had to come together to create us, no matter what. And there's even work that comes into my mind, IVF work. Oh my God, I got to represent an egg that was harvested from a woman in Greece and implanted. And this woman wanted to allow that little egg to really be acknowledged in her family system. And it was such a beautiful movement because this mother felt so like guilty, she realized, like as if she stole something because she wasn't able to conceive on her own. So they harvested an egg, and it was beautiful to see the mother let go of that egg with absolute joy And also the egg was confused. I got to represent the egg, and it was like, wait, but who's my mom then? What am I doing? Where am I going? What is this? And then totally happy with what came, but had to acknowledge where she was coming from, or in this case, it was a she. So, that there's something, just these small little acknowledgments make a big difference, so that there isn't this limitation placed on, or that need that's not getting met. Just
Yeah.
gotta acknowledge. Yeah.
Got it. Awesome. Okay. So, Dr. Yvonne, one of the questions I always ask my audience is if the time machine and the DeLorean was real, if you could travel back in time. The question I actually have for you, since you're our first returning guest, is that if you were able to travel back and if you were to share one advice to your younger self that can help with her spiritual growth, what would you say to a younger version of Dr. Yvonne?
Oh, that is, this one, this gets me there. So I remember you asked me this before, and I do have sort of the same answer, in the sense of I'm on the right path, because I had so many great things happening. Like constellation work was delivered to me 20 years ago. So I'll be 40 next year.
Mm,
So I've been in this work for a really long time, and in the healing arts. So I've been very privileged.
mm,
So I it's so it's so hard to say, because it's like that's what happened. So I don't
mm.
know what advice I could give, other than I don't know, even that. So I want to say, like, keep
Yeah.
showing up, or keep it, but it's like, no, that's what I did. So it's hard to say what would it really have excelled this spiritual growth, because I don't I don't mean to toot my own horn on one
I
level, but maybe phrase it different. Maybe
I
phrase
will phrase it. Okay,
Yeah.
so no, that's a good. Okay, I know what you mean because I mean, look, everything happens for a reason, and there's beauty in the ups and downs, right? There's lessons we need to learn in life. So how about I ask it a different way? What if I were to ask, what would you say to your mom
Hmm.
that's in the same age you are today?
Huh.
So her younger self, what advice would you give her if you could have a conversation with her?
Oh my God, I would have loved to be with my mom at that age. I'm so in love with my mom.
Yeah. So
um,
what would be one piece of advice because she doesn't know the woman you've grown to today, right? So if you can speak to her and you travel back in time there, that's a different question. What would you say that one?
it's a different one. Yeah. I don't see it. Don't hate me. Don't be frustrated with me, but really, like, I'm so impressed with what she did at her age, at that age and stage. She really dove into this work early on, into like Gestalt therapy and like mental health and all this. So she had me at 38 years old, 39. So I'm like, it's kind of interesting that that's the timeline of it. We are the same age and stage. So
Well, think of it this way. It's that the what you're sharing with her isn't necessarily coming from a place of, oh, this is something you need to know. It's just
yeah.
more if you had an opportunity to just have a conversation with her then, right?
Oh God.
What will be one thought if you had a moment to share within a minute? What would you say to her if you could travel back in time and just meet the younger self of your mom?
I would just, I'd tell her I'm so proud of her, and to keep having the courage to open up.
Hmm.
So I'm crying a little
Hmm.
because my mother, I respect her so deeply, because she immigrated from Argentina. Her story is something I resonate with tremendously. She's so brave and came from such adversity and trauma, war, threats. There's so much, and she came to this country for a better life for she and her family. And I would just tell her, like, thanks, thanks for having me, because that was brave. It was brave to keep creating life, knowing what she and her family were escaping. And I see my mother as one of my greatest resources in life, her and her family line. So I just tell her thank you for being exactly who you are and what you did and the actions that you chose, because what she chose to leave behind created the ability for me to show up in this world. And my one precious life, which we all have. If we
Yeah.
really look to it and can like honor our family system, it is truly a miracle that we're here.
Yeah.
And no matter what the story is of what we came from, we all have our own stuff. But I am just so deeply appreciative and proud of that family line with all of its strengths and limitations.
Mhm.
So good question, Ben. That got me right in the feels. Good job.
It wasn't intended for that. I'll be honest. I really felt what you just shared. I really felt what you just shared, and I just want to acknowledge you for being open and just sharing that, because there's so much healing when you allow the space for acknowledgement. And I'm very grateful for you to be able to share that moment with us. So thank you for that. I mean that.
Thank you.
Thank you. So with all that said, Dr. Yvonne, where can our audience find you?
They can find me in Altadena, California, at the lovely Healing Arts Center of Altadena. And we have like a real old school website. So you can click that and see my name there among other beautiful practitioners. We have such a wonderful array of healers, teacher healer guides, all there. Probably around 15 of us, I think, maybe a little more. And yeah, that's where you can find me.
Beautiful.
And I am I'm here and available. I love working at this center. A little backstory on that is I arrived at that center 20 years ago, nearly now, and I showed up in one of my like hardest health states with Dr. Kenny, who she was my doctor for 10 years, and now she's been my mentor for another 10. And it is amazing. Did I know stepping in there at 20 years old that I would be now there receiving patients? Holy cow, no way. I would have never thought in a million years. I was just trying to heal and feel better myself. So this is such a full circle healing arts center that I feel blessed to be a part of. And again, I would have never imagined it in a million years. So it's wonderful to be there.
Mm,
I
beautiful.
hope.
And I'll definitely include your information in the show notes. I do want to acknowledge that too. Our family has been really blessed to have been introduced to the Healing Arts Center there, and we met some wonderful people, right? Yourself included, with Dr. Kenny. And I also want to mention one more thing, which is when it comes to constellation work, because you also, aside from seeing people from a chiropractic standpoint, you also do constellation work. And that doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be in person either. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to be able to share that, because if people are curious and they want to do a constellation session with you, what would that look like? Whether it's done over Zoom, like, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So it's exactly that. It's worldwide. That's amazing. There's tons of facilitators that offer this, so not just myself, but you do it over Zoom or any type of online kind of viewing platform. And what that looks like is kind of what we described with objects or with paper. And it's still just walking through the exact process. And you can have more than one person on the screen with you. Like if you want your family to do this with you, or if you have friends that want to do it, you can still facilitate with multiple people. I've been on Zoom calls that are 110 people. I'm not kidding. So
Wow.
it's amazing what can happen in a group through the internet, because again, we're connected.
Yeah.
So it's amazing. It's amazing work. So it's like anything else. If you want to show up and do the work will allow exactly what's meant to be explored and processed. So yeah. Technology, I'm not a big fan of it, but there are some parts that are pretty great. And that's one of them, because we are now deeply connected. That was one of the gifts of the pandemic, actually. I I would have never gone online had it not be for the pandemic. So
Mm,
that was really a big gift. And for lots of facilitators, they've shared that same sentiment, that
yeah.
we just have been able to spread this work so much more. And I can be the first one to say, I thought it would never work through technology. I was like, no way, you have to be in person with somebody and you have to be there with them and see them and hear them. No, you don't. You don't need to have deep healing happen in the traditional way, which is in the group setting of in person. Again, groups of over 100 people resonating and working and holding that field, and it's phenomenal.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, and I'll just share with my audience, if you feel compelled or you want to learn more, feel free to reach out to Dr. Yvonne. Honestly, I can say that 100% can vouch for her and that she is such a warm, light energy. We're all energy, right? And to your point about technology, yeah, it can translate because at the end of the day, it's just about being in that field and that energy and feeling it, feeling through it, learning what you want to take, learning what you want to let go.
Amen
Right.
to that.
So thank you so much for sharing this time today with me, Dr. Yvonne. I will have to find another topic for you to come back again in the near future, but also want to give a shout out to your mom. Thank you for having Dr. Yvonne.
She'll love hearing that. That's so sweet. And my dad, he brought me in too.
And your dad,
Gotta represent Pops too.
That's
But
right.
yes.
That's right.
Oh,
Thank you.
Thank you, Ben, so much. This was wonderful, and I really appreciate the work you're doing, and it makes a difference. So keep it up. We need you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
I loved today's interview with Dr. Yvonne and the warmth that she brought to today's conversation. There's so many golden nuggets that I got. I feel the essence of today's interview is best summarized by a quote I remembered, and that is, "We are not victims of our genes, but masters of our fates, able to create lives overflowing with peace, happiness, and love." This quote was by Dr. Bruce H. Lipton. It's oftentimes easier to change areas of your life that you can see, that you're aware of. But what about the things you don't see, that you're not aware of? I wholeheartedly agree with Dr. Bruce Lipton that we're masters of our fate and that we have the power and ability to create lives overflowing with peace, happiness, and love. One of the first steps of self-healing is deciding that you're ready to be healed. And I hope that by learning more about Family Constellation Therapy today, that you find that awareness, courage, and self-love to explore healing modalities that best work for you. If you enjoyed today's interview, please share this episode with your loved ones, business partners, or teammates that you feel can benefit. I am grateful that you joined us for today's episode. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button so that we can thrive together with a stronger mind, body, and soul. Until next time, folks, be kind to yourself. Be in the light. Be you. Thank you so much for tuning in to my Boom Vision podcast. If you'd like to find out more about me and this podcast, head over to benjaminyeh.com. That's spelled BenjaminYeh.com. If you haven't already, click subscribe, and I'll catch you next time.